You're useless without a job or education, and we don't need you in this house.
My mother-in-law snapped, throwing boiling water at me.
Oh no.
It's hot! What are you doing? I yelled, shocked by the sudden attack. It was unbelievable that she would do something so extreme. Fortunately, I wasn't burned, but it could have been a disaster.
What? I told you we don't need an unemployed, uneducated person like you here.
Was that a reason to throw boiling water? The irony was that it was David, my husband, who was jobless, not me. My anger grew with every word she uttered. If that's what you want, then fine. I'll leave this house, I said resignedly.
Finally decided to leave? That makes things easier for me.
She replied, clearly pleased. Far from being apologetic, she seemed to relish my departure. I couldn't stand to stay another second and quickly packed my things, returning to my parents' home that very day. She was oblivious to the fact that David was the one without a job and that I had been covering all the household expenses. Since quitting my job, I had started trading stocks, now earning about $30,000 a month. I wasn't bothered by leaving my in-laws' house. I could live independently and wouldn't care for them even if they begged. They would regret driving me away. 2 years ago, I married David, my college sweetheart. Both of us had studied economics and vaguely planned to work in finance. Eventually, we both landed jobs at different brokerage firms, becoming busy stockbrokers with little time to meet. Despite the hectic schedule, our relationship remained strong, and 3 years later, David proposed.
I'll make sure you're happy, marry me.
He had said. I knew I could make it work with him, feeling it was the ultimate happiness to live with my loved one. Yes, I'd love to. I accepted. I thought we would live happily together, but then David suggested something unexpected.
Can you quit your job and live with my mom at our family home?
He asked. What? I don't mind quitting, but shouldn't we live alone since we're newlyweds? I replied.
But I'm worried about leaving mom alone. I'll make sure you're not troubled.
He insisted. David's father passed away from a heart attack when he was still in middle school. Being an only child, David had lived alone with his mother, Margaret, ever since his father's death. It was natural for him to be concerned about his mother. All right, if you insist. I agree. We'll live together. When I visited to formally introduce myself as David's wife, Margaret didn't seem all that bad, and with David by my side, I felt they could manage. Agreeing with David's proposal, I decided to move in with his mother. 2 weeks later, we moved to Margaret's house, where we were warmly received. Margaret seemed genuinely happy to have us, especially David, living with her. From today, we'll live together. Thank you in advance for your kindness. However, the moment I greeted her, I noticed a shadow pass over Margaret's face. Margaret looked at me with a mix of coldness and dissatisfaction, her face hard to read.
It is not like you were needed here.
I was taken aback. Margaret murmured something under her breath, but I could not catch it clearly and just smiled to smooth things over. At that point, I felt a twinge of apprehension about living with her, but nothing else significant happened that day. The next morning, I was jolted awake by Margaret's loud voice.
Why are you still sleeping? Get up and start making breakfast.
It was shockingly early, and I wondered what could have prompted such urgency. Glancing at the bedside clock, it showed only 4 a.m., with darkness still enveloping the outside. Why so early? I asked, my voice heavy with sleep.
Just because you do not have a job does not mean you can laze around all day.
Margaret snapped back. Even though I thought it was unreasonable to be up so early, especially since I was jobless, I didn't retort and instead began to prepare breakfast. While preparing breakfast, I endured a constant barrage of criticism from Margaret.
Speed it up. Why does it take so long? You're so sluggish.
As time ticked by, and after about 30 minutes, breakfast was finally ready. I'm sorry for the delay. I apologized.
Finally. Couldn't you have done it any faster?
Margaret continued to complain, her voice tinged with impatience. I thought to myself that speeding up anymore was physically impossible, yet I restrained myself from retorting. All I could do was to smile and deflect the situation.
What's with this soup? It's too salty.
Margaret grimaced after tasting it. Do you think so? I don't believe it's that salty. I responded, trying to maintain my composure.
What? Are you saying my taste is off? Are you trying to kill me off quickly by serving such salty food?
Margaret's accusation was sharp and filled with an underlying anger. I was flabbergasted, wondering how Margaret could even entertain such a notion. What was Margaret really trying to say? And why was she being so harsh towards me? Puzzled and feeling cornered, I decided to confront the issue directly. Margaret, why are you being so hard on me? I asked, hoping for some clarity.
What are you talking about? I'm not being hard on you. Or what? Do you want to paint me as the villain here?
Margaret's response was defensive and dismissive. No, that is not what I meant. I faltered, overwhelmed by Margaret's domineering presence.
After you are done cleaning up, start on the house cleaning. Once that's done, there is laundry to do. There is no time to rest.
Margaret's orders came one after another, leaving me no respite. From that day forward, I was constantly bombarded with snide remarks from Margaret, draining me emotionally and physically. Doing laundry, I always hear,
You left some wrinkles.
even when I clean, there is always a nagging comment like,
You missed some dust in the corner.
After a month living with Margaret, I started feeling like this constant criticism was taking a toll on my mental health. So, I turned to my husband for support. I told him, It's about your mom. She keeps making these cutting remarks every day, and it's really getting to me. Could you possibly talk to her about it? But my husband didn't react at all. I was momentarily annoyed by his lack of response, but then I noticed his pale complexion, suggesting he had something serious to say. Concerned, I asked, What's wrong? Is something bothering you? He hesitated before slowly starting.
Actually, I've been laid off from my job.
I was stunned and confused. A joke, right? What do you mean? I couldn't believe what he was saying. He explained further.
There have been layoffs at the company due to downsizing. I got caught in that.
Apparently, the economic downturn had severely affected the company's profits, prompting a significant reduction in staff as a cost-saving measure. So, you mean you're going to be unemployed starting tomorrow?
Well, I'm still officially employed for another month due to the notice period, but after that,
He replied weakly. Fortunately, I had been using my experience from a previous job at a brokerage firm to trade stocks. Although it was challenging at first, I now make about 3 million yen a month from it, so we're not struggling financially. While consoling my husband, I had almost forgotten about the harassment from my mother-in-law. The day after David's job loss, the atmosphere at home became palpably tense. I was constantly on edge, trying to navigate the minefield of Margaret's critical remarks and passive-aggressive comments. Losing David's income meant we were in uncharted financial waters, and it felt like I had to be the bedrock of stability for us both. I bore the weight of our new reality, telling myself that I needed to support David through this challenging time. As the days turned into a month, the inevitable happened. David was officially let go from his job. He looked at me with sunken eyes, his voice heavy with guilt.
I'm really sorry. I promise I'll find something soon.
He wasted no time in starting his job hunt, visiting the local employment agency the very next day. But as the weeks passed, David's initial determination seemed to wane. He began spending more and more time on the couch, aimlessly flipping through TV channels or staring at his phone. One morning, as I handed him his coffee, I tentatively broached the subject of his job search. Hey, love, maybe it is time to really dive into the job hunt? I asked, trying to mask my concern with encouragement. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping.
I've been looking, but nothing out there seems right. It is just all so overwhelming.
His words echoed the hopelessness he felt, and I found myself silently picking up the financial slack, ensuring our bills were paid and the pantry was stocked. Margaret's daily criticisms and snide remarks only added to the growing pressure. At first, I felt determined to be the pillar of strength in our home, especially with David out of work. But as her negativity continued unabated, my resolve began to crumble, leaving me feeling increasingly powerless and drained. Then, on an unusually brisk morning, David announced he was going out early. Surprised yet hopeful, I wondered if he had finally decided to take his job search seriously. After he left, I began cleaning, trying to find solace in the routine. Margaret, ensconced in her usual spot on the sofa, lazily sipped her tea and watched me with a hawkish eye.
Don't just shuffle around, make sure it is spotless.
She remarked, her voice dripping with disdain. Her words struck a nerve, and in a moment of silent defiance, I chose to ignore her. But my silence was short-lived. Margaret's voice, now sharp and piercing, cut through the quiet.
Ignoring me, are you? How dare you, after all I've done?
She stood up abruptly, her anger palpable, closing in on me with a fury. I kept asking myself why Margaret was so infuriated as I persisted in my cleaning, doing my best to block out her growing hostility.
Will you ignore me indefinitely? People without jobs shouldn't even be in this house.
She yelled, her anger boiling over as she menacingly picked up a kettle of hot water, presumably the one she'd used for brewing her tea. The sudden heat as she splashed the water towards me made me cry out.
Oh no.
It's hot! What are you doing? Fortunately, the water had cooled slightly from boiling point, so it scalded but did not cause severe burns. Margaret's face twisted into a smirk.
You are finally listening. I've been saying if you cannot contribute, then you don't belong here.
Her words, dripping with venom, hit me hard. It was David who had lost his job, yet here I was, bearing the brunt of her wrath. Exasperated and defeated, I declared. All right, I will leave if that's what you want.
Good, that makes it easier for me. Hurry up and leave.
She responded, her smirk widening. The thought of spending another moment in that toxic environment was unbearable. I resolved to pack my bags and leave the house that day, no longer caring about what would become of Margaret. She would just have to live with the consequences of her actions. Heading straight to my parents' home, their surprised faces greeted me, but after sharing my ordeal, they enveloped me in warmth and understanding. I had half expected David to reach out, but the silence from his end was deafening, confirming my fears that I was no longer a priority to him. Amidst the solitude, I vowed not to initiate contact, waiting instead for him to make the first move. A month had elapsed since I moved back to my parents' home, yet not a single call or message from David. My emotional attachment to him had considerably waned, and the thought of reaching out to discuss a divorce had crossed my mind more than once. Then, one unexpectedly early morning, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, jolting me awake. I peered through the intercom screen to find David and Margaret standing at the doorstep, their unexpected presence raising both curiosity and apprehension in my mind. What could they possibly want after all this time? I pressed the intercom button and inquired. Yes, can I help you? Margaret's voice, as sharp and commanding as ever, shot through the speaker.
We've decided to forgive you, so stop this nonsense and come back home immediately.
Forgive me? I was baffled. What imagined transgression did she believe warranted her forgiveness? I couldn't help but challenge her. Forgive me for what, may I ask? I haven't done anything that necessitates your forgiveness. Without waiting for her response, I cut off the intercom, feeling a mix of anger and defiance. Margaret's gall to arrive unannounced, assuming a position of authority, sparked a fury within me. Yet, they didn't leave. Instead, they began to pound on the door relentlessly. Margaret's voice grew louder.
Don't you dare hang up on me. You're coming back with us, now.
The situation was quickly escalating, and I realized ignoring them further might disturb the peace of the neighborhood. With a heavy sigh, I opened the door and allowed them into my parents' house, leading them to the living room and gesturing towards the sofa. As they took their seats, I braced myself and asked, "What brings you here so urgently?" Margaret, with no hint of understanding the absurdity of the situation, repeated her demand.
I told you, come back home with us.
Her words were perplexing. It was they who had insisted I leave, and now they were here, demanding my return as if nothing had happened. Maintaining my composure, I responded firmly. I'm sorry, but you were the ones who told me to leave. And now you expect me to just come back as if all is forgiven? That seems quite unreasonable. Considering David seemed indifferent to my departure, I've lost all desire to return to their home. Margaret's words echoed in my mind.
Stop acting like a child. We're extending our forgiveness, so you should gratefully return home.
But what was there to forgive? I had done nothing to warrant such condescension. Forgiveness? For what, exactly? Margaret, I've done nothing requiring your pardon. I countered, my patience wearing thin. She retorted.
Even someone without a job like you should appreciate being allowed in my home.
Her insinuation was misplaced. It was David who was unemployed, not me. Moreover, the prospect of returning only to be exploited daily was unappealing. Indeed, I may not have a job, but what about David, your son? Isn't his employment status of concern to you? I probed further. Margaret, flustered, replied.
That has nothing to do with this. David's job is irrelevant here.
I couldn't believe her ignorance or denial. Actually, it is relevant. Or are you unaware that your son is unemployed? I pushed back, realizing that David might have kept his job loss from her. Margaret looked at me, perplexed, as if trying to comprehend the situation for the first time. It seemed David had not shared his unemployment status with her, or perhaps she had chosen to ignore the reality. Turning to David, she demanded.
Is this true, David? Tell me.
David remained silent, avoiding eye contact, which only aggravated Margaret further.
Speak up, David. How can we resolve anything if you don't communicate?
She snapped. Bowing to the pressure, David finally admitted.
Yes, it's true. I lost my job.
Margaret's initial shock quickly turned to anger, not just at the situation, but directly at David.
Why have you been silent all this time? What are we supposed to do now?
She berated him. David glanced at me, then responded.
I haven't found work yet, but you have been earning, so we thought we'd manage somehow.
The audacity to rely on my income without any effort to contribute himself was appalling. This realization made me see the futility of supporting someone who wouldn't even strive to help themselves. At that moment, I knew that I had been foolish to even consider shouldering our burdens alone. You came here because you didn't want to work, didn't you? David, my husband, was clearly shaken by the confrontation.
No, that's not it at all.
Why come back now, after all this time? You didn't even bother to call or message since the day I left. He fumbled for an excuse.
I've been job hunting, just didn't find the time to reach out.
Such a pathetic excuse. Even if he was job hunting from dawn to dusk, sending a message takes but a moment. I was too dismayed to respond. Margaret, cutting off our exchange, urged me to return home.
David's here, and he wants you back. Just come home already.
The audacity of her request after all I'd endured was astounding. Come back? After everything you've put me through, Margaret? That's ludicrous. She downplayed her actions.
Oh, don't exaggerate. I was only trying to help you.
Help? By pouring hot water on me? Is that your idea of assistance? Frustration bubbled up as I recounted the ordeal. Unaware of the incident, David looked puzzled.
What? Mom, you threw hot water at Emily?
Yes, it's true. She attacked me with boiling water while I was cleaning, though thankfully, I wasn't burnt. I was close to calling the police on her. David, bewildered, turned to Margaret.
Why would you do that?
She blamed me, claiming my disregard for her commands justified her actions. The room erupted in argument, the air thick with tension and disbelief. Exhausted by their incessant bickering, I interjected. If you must argue now, do it elsewhere. If you've said all you need to, please leave. Their demeanor shifted drastically. From defiant to desperate, they pleaded for my return.
Please come back. We promise things will be different.
Margaret implored, her voice cracking. David, looking equally forlorn, added.
Emily, I beg you. I will find a job. Just come back.
Deep down, I've always suspected their true intentions were tied to my income. David, my husband, seems to think that because I have a stable income, he can just coast along, avoiding work under the guise of vague promises. And Margaret, my mother-in-law, probably sees it as killing two birds with one stone. Taking out her daily frustrations on me while also getting her chores done. You thought I'd just agree and come back? Not a chance. You both see me as nothing more than a convenience, right? My voice echoed with a mixture of anger and defiance. David hurriedly replied.
That's not true at all. I swear I'll make sure you won't have to face any hardships because of me.
But his words rang hollow. After all this time, what was there left to believe? So you say, but once I'm back, you'll probably just laze around, not bothering to find a job, right? If you're so keen on saying this, why haven't you secured a job yet? It's obvious you just don't want to work. It seemed I had struck a nerve. David fell silent, unable to muster a comeback. And you, Margaret, claiming you won't do anything terrible again? Who would believe that? After the constant harassment, I'm sure it would just start up again. Like David, Margaret too fell silent, her inability to respond telling the whole story. Leaving the two speechless in the living room, I retreated to my bedroom. When I returned to the living room 5 minutes later, they were still sitting there, silent, heads bowed. How long do you plan to sit there like that? Well, it doesn't matter. But could you write this for me? I asked, presenting David with divorce papers. My name was already filled in, of course.
What is this?
The confusion was apparent on his face, having been suddenly confronted with the divorce papers. He must have never thought I would actually consider divorce. Don't you see? It's a divorce form. You kept saying you'd find a job soon, but you never tried, and you didn't even contact me while I was at my parents' place. I've run out of patience.
Wait, don't rush things like this.
David's self-centered plea was transparent. The situation was his own doing. It was only natural to face the consequences. My decision to divorce won't change, no matter what you say. I stated firmly.
Don't you think divorce is too harsh?
Margaret interjected, unable to hide her concern. I don't feel sorry at all. He deserves it. I replied coldly, the truth in my words clear and unwavering.
Okay, I get it. But don't regret this after we divorce.
David said, signing the divorce papers with a resigned expression. Regret was the furthest thing from my mind. On the contrary, I felt a sense of relief, a clearing of the air, as if a weight had been lifted. I'll handle the divorce papers and file them at the city hall. You don't need to worry about alimony, just make sure you leave quickly. With these words, our divorce was finalized. I wondered if I had gone too far, but I realized things would never change if I didn't take drastic measures. Margaret would continue to exploit me, and David would never seriously look for work. After evicting them from my home, I filed the divorce papers at the city hall on the same day. 2 weeks later, while I was enjoying some peaceful time at my parents' house, an unexpected call from Margaret disrupted the tranquility. What could she possibly want now? Yes, what is it? I answered, bracing myself for the onslaught.
Hey! The electricity and gas have been cut off. What on earth did you do?
Margaret exclaimed, her voice tinged with panic and confusion. I hadn't done anything specific. All I did was stop covering their living expenses, which I had been doing for far too long. I haven't done anything. I responded calmly, trying to contain my frustration.
It can't be. It's been working fine until now.
She continued, her voice rising in desperation. Well, have you been paying your bills? I asked, already knowing the answer.
What?
She stuttered, clearly flustered by the question. It was astonishing that she hadn't grasped such a basic concept. Paying for services used is a fundamental responsibility, understandable even to a child. Don't say what. Utilities aren't free, you know. You've probably been cut off for non-payment. I pointed out, stating the obvious.
Wait a minute, this is really troubling. Emily, could you cover the bill just for this month?
She begged, her audacity astounding me. Why should I pay for someone I no longer live with or owe anything to? Have you lost your senses, Margaret? David and I are no longer married, we don't share a household. I reminded her sternly. Why should I bear the cost?
But we have no money.
She trailed off, expecting sympathy. That's something you should discuss with David. He promised he'd find work, remember? I retorted, my patience wearing thin.
But he hasn't found anything yet. As his ex-wife, you could at least help out, right?
She pressed, her plea dripping with desperation. The gall of asking for help after everything was bewildering. Understood. I finally said. As I said this, Margaret's tone shifted to a seemingly pleasant one.
I'm glad you understand. I'll count on you for the payment then.
I've understood you very well. I retorted, my voice firm and final. This is the end of our relationship. Even after the divorce, I refuse to be someone you can just use at your convenience.
Goodbye.
What are you talking about?
Margaret sounded like she wanted to say more, but I ended the call abruptly, ensuring that it would be the last time we spoke by setting up a call block. I had endured enough of her cruelty over the years, and David turned out to be a complete disappointment. With this, I finally severed ties with them. After hanging up, I muttered to myself. They deserve this. A month passed, and there was no intrusion from my ex-husband or Margaret. Life was peaceful. Then, on a leisurely day, as I was reviewing stock charts, which is part of my daily routine, my phone chimed with a message notification. Not expecting much, thinking it might be spam, I checked my phone only to see it was from my ex-husband.
I'm really sorry for everything. After losing my job, I managed to get by only because you were taking care of the bills, and I took it for granted.
The message read.
Recently, I started working at a factory. It's just a temporary job, but I'm finally making my own money. It might sound strange to say this now, but if you're okay with it, would you consider coming back? Ever since you left, Mom has been really harsh on me and it's tough.
Reading his message, I scoffed. There's no way I would go back. What is he thinking? While I commend him for starting to work at the factory, there's absolutely no chance of reconciliation. It seems Margaret has now turned her critical eye on him since I'm out of the picture. She never changed, after all. While reflecting on this, I decided not to reply and blocked his number instead. 6 months after the divorce, through a friend's introduction, I started dating a man 5 years my junior. He may be younger, but he's mature and treasures me. We're not considering marriage yet, but it's something I hope for in the future. For now, I cherish the happy moments we share together.